There's many different parts on the front end of, or as they call it, chassis parts on the front end of any vehicle, car, light truck, SUV. There's some commonality between all vehicles, and I thought today I'd show you some areas that make noises and they break and explain why they break. For example, this is what's called a sway bar link. And what it does is it keeps the sway bar, which runs across the front of your car, right, one end of it, one side, away from hitting the frame. When these links break, and they all eventually do, they make a tremendous banging noise. They're not a safety concern, and they would fail a safety, but they're not a safety concern, and you will not lose control of your car. Your wheel's not going to fall off. They sound a lot worse than they really are, but they get awfully annoying, and they do need to be changed, and they're fairly inexpensive to change. And in your car's lifetime, you will be changing it. Some of them are a little shorter, some are a little longer, but this is what's called a sway bar link kit. The other two major components on any car's front end, and they come in different configurations, is what's called a tie rod end and a ball joint. And basically, the tie rod end, or the outer tie rod end in this case, holds your top of your wheel to your car. The bottom ball joint, which is sometimes attached to a control arm, sometimes just a ball joint as you see here, holds the bottom of the wheel. As you can see here, I can't move this, okay, but this is a movable part. When they're worn out, you can usually move them with the tip of your finger, okay? They make a terrible clicking noise and they make a terrible banging noise when they're worn out. Most good shops, all good shops, will catch it on an oil change because you can tell by the wheels wobbling or loose or there's a little bit of play. They'll all advise you, okay? The reason that these wear out in particular is because a lot of them aren't greasable anymore. They used to be greasable in the old days. They're self-sealed, and eventually the grease dries out. It's metal to metal, and the parts wear out. The last thing I want to show you on this suspension is what's called the strut, or replaces the old version of a shock absorber. There's two ways to get a strut. This is basically, this is a strut that goes on the front of a car. There's also rear struts. In some cases, some cars have struts all around. Some have front struts and rear shock absorbers, just like the old style shock absorbers. But the principle is all the same. If it's a strut, it has a plate that holds the coil spring. So the whole idea was to compact the whole suspension and put everything in one unit as opposed to a separate shock and a separate coil and a separate this and that. But this is a very inefficient way to change it. The way the market has moved, you'll excuse my head for 1 second. Nowadays, we buy a strut completely loaded. This is that same piece that you see there with the coil already on it and the mount on it and the boot on it. That way, everything wears at the same time. It costs a little bit more. You save a lot in the labor because you don't have to transfer over the coil from one to the other. And eventually, when this mount wears out, not at the same time as the strut, you save a lot of expense because everything's done at once with a lifetime guarantee. This is the way the market's moved. This is a complete strut. And what you'll hear with this is, this will cause your front end to bounce. And a lot of times when the coil springs break, as they do when you hit a pothole or something like that, and you turn your wheel one way or another, you'll hear a bang. And that's because this coil spring is broken. That's my shortened version of the front end.